Welcome, critters. I'm Claire Jones, your devoted host of the Sacred Reading CR podcast, where we discuss and examine critical role episodes, plot lines, characters, and players through the lens of sacred reading practices. So this particular episode is about Campaign 1, Episode 16, I believe, Part 1. And joining me today is Petall. Woohoo!
Hello!
Yes, we are in the midst of holiday breaks, so it is a bit chaotic over here, but we're making it work. So,
yes, absolutely.
The icebreaker question for today is, what movie or show or piece of media would you want to live in?
Oh, I know the answer to this immediately. I would want to live in the world of Howl's Moving Castle. That is my
That's a good
favorite
one.
movie of all times, and I just think living in a Ghibli movie would be extremely nice and pleasant.
Yeah, I mean, it's gorgeous. Gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know why, but my mind went immediately towards The Witcher.
Huh, interesting.
I don't know why.
I must admit I've never seen The Witcher.
Yeah, I mean, it's classic high fantasy, very dramatic, lots of magic and monsters and stuff like that. But I feel like I could be a badass in that world.
Yeah.
Like, whatever I end up living in that world, I would make an impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I could just get the chance to get with Henry Cavill, aka Witcher, that would just be a cherry on top.
Yeah, yeah.
I was thinking about Buffy for a minute, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the show, but I was like, man, they deal with so many apocalypses. Like, I don't want to.
Yeah. Yeah. I was realizing I could have cheated and said The Legend of Vox Machina and being able to live in the world of Critical Role. My brain immediately latched onto Howl's Moving Castle and
Yeah. I mean, I think it would be a lot less stressful of an existence with Howl's.
Yeah. Oh yeah, most likely.
Yeah. And I think the same about The Witcher, but I'm down for that kind of chaos.
Yeah.
All right. Well, please join us as we embark on this exciting adventure in story analysis and self-reflection in order to deepen our understandings of ourselves and the world around us. So, as always, we love hearing your own insights and stories as well. So please comment, like, and subscribe. And then, ready? All right, let's dive in. All right, so Vox Machina, they are currently on an airship headed to Vasselheim in order to inter the Horn of Orcus at the Grand Chantry of the Platinum Dragon. They have just triumphed over a band of pirating wyvern riders, say that 10 times fast, and are now continuing on their journey. Over the next couple days, Grog starts to grow a beard thanks to his belt of dwarven kind, and Keyleth braids the few translucent hairs that appear. I think Matt described it as fishing line.
Yep, that is the descriptor that he used.
And Vax helps him along by also gluing bits of frayed rope to Grog's chin while he's sleeping. In the middle of the 6th day, the weather turns stormy and Tiberius approaches Scanlan to ask about the circlet/Ioun stone trade. Once again, I believe this is the 3rd time he's brought it up. Scanlan ends the conversation without even answering him. So Tiberius asks Keyleth to create a slate so that he can explain his argument to Scanlan. He says so that maybe his tiny mind can understand. Vex and Pike object to the criticism of Scanlan, with Pike saying, "That's rude," accurately. Keyleth creates a shale wall from some of the weights on the ship, so Tiberius scribbles out his calculations and condescendingly explains his argument, very, very condescendingly. Scanlan finally agrees to make the trade, and they hug it out, with Scanlan immediately showing off his new Ioun stone to Pike. It soon starts snowing, and Keyleth tells them that they are actually near the village of the Fire Ashari, Pyra, where she needs to go at some point to continue on her Aramente journey. I don't know why my mouth was not liking that word. It's part of her test in order to become a leader of the Ashari people. She also tells them that the last person who went on the Oh my God. I say this word often. Aramente. I don't know why my mouth is not wanting to do that today. Okay. Which was her mother, and she didn't come back. They ask her some clarifying questions and agree to accompany her there, perhaps after they leave Vasselheim. Land is finally sighted as they reach the continent, and Kima joins them on deck, pointing out the various landmarks. They can see a singular mountain spire that is protruding from the forest below, and a very old and very fortified city perching on top with many different layers of walls and ballista protecting it. The sky ship slowly descends into Vasselheim proper, and Vex pulls out heavy winter cloaks for everyone. Vax rolls an insight check on Kima before they disembark and gets the feeling that she has a nervousness about her. They all make their way onto the platform and meet a cluster of well-armored men and women waiting for them. There is an older man that Kima approaches, and he introduces himself as Scale Bearer Jan. He leads them toward the Platinum Sanctuary, and Tiberius asks if he can point out any arcane shops along the way, but Jan tells them that arcane practices are banned from Vasselheim as it is considered a divine city. Tiberius also asks whether dragonborns are common in the city, and Jan says that they usually are not, but the Order of the Platinum Dragon does recognize their importance, although Tiberius, as a red dragonborn, which is of the chromatic variety versus the metallic variety that the Platinum Dragon represents, does make him a bit nervous. So Tiberius casts Disguise Self to transform himself into a gold dragonborn, but Jan warns him not to do such magics so openly in public in the future. Vex and Keyleth discusses a strategy to surround the container that holds the Horn of Orcus as they traverse the city, and Keyleth turns into an eagle while Vex takes to the roofs, but she rolls a natural 1, and everyone notices her up there. Jan explains as they walk that Vasselheim is the oldest civilization on the planet and is considered the holiest place in the entire world, which is why arcane is considered profane and tightly controlled. It has lasted through every single war thanks to its emphasis on protections and the quarter of the populace who function as a militia. They approach a grand stone fortress that looks older than time itself and is covered in ancient draconic symbols. Keyleth, as an eagle, circles it to take a closer look, while Vex clumsily climbs down from the roofs to join the rest of the group. The group enters the Platinum Sanctuary, while Keyleth checks out a group of militia that are loading ballista and firing them into the forest surrounding the city to successfully scare off some serpentine beast lurking down there. She then heads back to the temple and squeezes through one of the windows, and she is immediately greeted by guards with spears, and she tries to explain her presence but rolls a 6. So they shackle her and pull her toward the main chamber where they come upon the rest of the group. Grog laughs at her for getting into trouble, and Kima firmly asserts that Keyleth is actually with her, so they quickly unshackle her and apologize. They continue on, and Pike senses the deep holiness of the space. Scanlan makes an innuendo about exploring her faith further, and Kima scolds him for using such language in the temple. Entering the central room, they admire the massive artwork that surrounds them, depicting the various planes of existence, as well as the ancient battle between the Platinum Dragon and its enemy, the multi-headed dragon Tiamat. They are introduced to High Bearer Ward, of which Kima is a disciple, and he requests to see the container holding the horn. He casts a spell, confirming that it is the real deal and that it must be sealed immediately. He explains that there was a Star of Exaltation, a holy item that was destroyed centuries ago, that blessed Vasselheim and protected it. The chamber below the sanctuary that it was kept in was later infested with some type of spider creature that they will need to clear out in order to inter the horn there. Vax asks how they plan on protecting the hall once the horn is there, and Vord asserts that the temple is extremely well guarded, and once the vault's defenses are triggered, he says, there is nothing that could get inside. Keyleth asks how the Star of Exaltation was destroyed in the first place, and he explains that it was removed from the chamber and used as a focus during a particular war, thus depleting its power. Vex asks if they are to inter it immediately, and Vord agrees. She then uses her haggling skills to ask if they will be compensated for their trouble, and he offers 3,000 gold to the group. Kima attempts to refuse it, but Scanlan jumps in and helps Vex's persuasion check with a fabricated tale about giving alms to the poor. Kima offers to show them to the vault, sneering at Scanlan's deceptions, and uses her holy symbol to reveal the doorway. Vax takes the lead and checks for traps as they enter, while Tiberius casts light, but there is a thick mist that blocks it, so he cancels the spell. Keyleth casts Gust of Wind to part the mist, and Tiberius casts Light again to reveal 2 pillars with dragon carvings wrapped around their bases. The mist seems to be coming from the dragon's mouths. So Tiberius takes Vex's message earring from her without asking and hands it to Grog, explaining that Vex and Tiberius are usually close to each other during battle, so it makes more sense to give it to other members of the party who would be closer to the fight. I don't know if that's actually true. I think it's completely made up, but it happened. Then Keyleth uses Gust of Wind to keep the mist at bay while half of the group rushes through the room, but Vax rolls a 1 and ends up brushing a shoulder against the mist. It triggers the dragon mouths to blow a burst of fire at the members that were in the middle of the space. Keyleth has to burn another Gust of Wind spell in order to clear the mist for the rest of the group, but they are successful in running through. They enter the hallway with another dark room ahead of them, so Tiberius casts Light on one of Vex's arrows and she shoots it into the room so that they can see. There are numerous circles on the floor of the room, and Vax clicks his boots of haste in order to hurry in, much to everyone's dismay. He lands on one of the circles, and there is a loud grinding sound as the room moves in response. The portion of the room underneath him pistons upward and slams into the ceiling, which he manages to dodge, but there are now several different pillars moving up and down around the space. He tries to make his way back to the group, but is caught by one of the pillars and takes 40 points of crushing damage. That's a lot of damage. He makes it back and then looks around for any type of trigger device that they can use to make the pillars stop, finding a small hole in the ceiling in the center of the room. Pike says, "Come on, Vex," and Percy asks her, "Race you for it, you first or me?" So Vex notches an arrow and aims it, saying, "Let's do this first, since your pistol might destroy it. You are much more powerful than me, Percy." Keyleth casts Enhance Ability on her while Scanlan gives her inspiration, and Vex attempts to shoot at the hole, rolling a 35. Tiberius uses the last second to cast Telekinesis to urge the arrow upward, and they are successful in halting the pillars. So they decide to take a short rest before they head any further, and that's where they break for the episode. So what do we think of this first half?
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I think it's interesting as they like the comparisons and like the differences as well between their experience with cultural differences in Vasselheim versus their experience with cultural differences in Craighammer.
Yeah, that's very true. Like, okay, there's a lot of sass in my notes for this first half. And it has a lot to do with the characters' reactions to the city. And you're right, it's in a very strong comparison to Craighammer in the differences.
Yeah.
What were the differences you noticed?
Well, I think it's just interesting to notice that, like in Craighammer, a lot of it had to do with like them being like outsiders and them being like not dwarves and that sort of thing. Whereas here it's much more of a just the fact that the Vasselheim doesn't like arcane magic, which is very strongly linked to a lot of the players, a lot of the characters, and I just think it's interesting because both of them like are about things that they cannot really change about themselves. I feel like at this point, now that they've like been playing for a little while, they have like a more of an idea of how to like interact with people of like different opinions of them, but they still find that same struggle of like being like, we can't like fully do things the way that we're used to doing them. And yeah,
I'm glad that you brought that up, because there is, I mean, we talked about this in the first episode of this podcast, is like the outsider theme. Like it was very strong in Craighammer, this outsider theme, and they are still outsiders in Vasselheim. Their position as the other still holds, but how they wield that is totally different from Craighammer. Like Craighammer, they are nervous, they are awkward, they fumble around, they're put in the lesser position for sure as the other. But in Vasselheim, they almost take the superior position.
Yeah.
The other, like, we are the other and we know better because we are the other.
Yeah, and I wonder if part of it has to do with, because I was thinking about it as you were like going over the like episode summary, and I hadn't realized this before, but the premise behind Vasselheim is like very similar to like the premise of like the Vatican City, of like being very religiously based, of like being like this core city standing on its own, of like just like the comparisons, like we've talked before about how a lot of the interpretations of religion in especially in campaign 1 are very rooted in like Christianity, and this is very in like the whole like Catholic like understanding of what's right and what's wrong and what's permitted and what's not.
I mean, Marish even says in the episode, as like an aside, that it feels like they just landed in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
But I think that using the Vatican is so much more accurate of a comparison than Jerusalem, because the Vatican has stood the test of time over and over with very strong roots and traditions that don't change.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's where like those sort of similarities, whereas with like Craighammer, it more seemed to be like cultural differences and like something that it would make sense to like tread a bit more sensitively. This kind of like plays into like religious trauma and religious understandings, and like the kind of it leaks into their characters as sort of like rebellion against those ideas.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I was just thinking about how in Craghammer they were other because more or less because of their races, because it's a very dwarven city and it was a very dwarven culture, and they have absolutely no control over their races. But in Vasselheim, they're other because of their abilities. And I wonder if they're more attached to the identity around their abilities. More so than the identity around their races.
Yeah, I mean, I would think so, because I mean, that's the part that they like consciously chose for themselves, and they were choosing the directions and how they approach life and all of these things.
Yeah, and I think they also they choose it, and it also heightens their self-esteem. Like they put a lot of stock into their abilities, because their abilities are the things that are allowing them to improve themselves, to improve their station in society. And so I think that's also adds to that attachment that they have with their identities wrapped around their abilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I also want to bring up Keyleth and her relationship to leadership in this. Like, especially now that we're starting to talk about the Armente. Like, we are really starting to see how she interacts with her idea of what leadership means to her. Like, we see this as being the main critic of organized religion. Like, we've seen that in the last couple episodes for sure, and especially the Platinum Dragon members. Like, I don't know why Kima sparked this distrust in Keyleth that has now spread to like all of the Platinum Dragon members. Like, Keyleth just doesn't trust any of them. And she's also insisting on scoping around as the eagle in this episode. She's also questioning the sanctuary's protection. And she also gets really nervous and really questioning around Vord's spell that he casts to identify the container that holds the horn. Like, she is physically gripping onto both Orion's and Talison's shoulders as that is happening in the episode of him casting that spell. And I wonder, it really shows her as someone who has an idea of what she thinks leadership is, what she's trying to do, but there's so much naivete involved in that ideal that she's aspiring towards.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely shows, like, as you were saying, the sort of ideals of leadership
Hmm.
without the experience to back up
Hmm.
those opinions. And I mean, and that's just like a natural part of like growing up in general. Like, it's so easy to latch onto all sorts of different ideas that sound good in theory, but it's not until you actually like get out there and put them to the test that you find out whether they work or not.
And I also find it shocking that she's never really explained her Aramente journey before now to the group too. Like,
Yeah.
canonically, they've been together for like what, a year at this point. Like, they have history, and she's just not ever talked about the leadership journey that she's trying to complete, which is the whole reason
Yeah.
why she's out in the world in the first place.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if maybe she's like mentioned it before, but she was like explaining it again for the benefit of the audience.
I truly believe that that's what happened, but I am also surprised that none of the characters knew any of that going
Yeah.
into it. Like, isn't that part of her intro video?
Yeah, it is. So it's interesting to see, like, yeah, like, or maybe they knew that she was on this leadership quest, but didn't know much about
Yeah,
like
the
what it
details.
entailed or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah. But she has a very complicated relationship with leadership. And
Oh,
we're
absolutely.
starting to really see that here for sure. Yeah, I mean, I already also made notes on Tiberius if we want to talk about Tiberius, like just the act first, ask questions later
Oh
thing.
yeah. Oh yeah. I feel like we have talked a lot
Oh,
about
I
Tiberius in
know.
our
I
episodes, and there are
know.
many more episodes
I
to talk
know.
about Tiberius, but it is worth mentioning.
Yeah, like just
Yes.
the look on Laura's face when he completely interrupted her 35 with his telekinesis. Like,
Yeah.
the first comment on the YouTube video that I was watching was like, it's just so sad that he completely stole that
Yeah.
spotlight from her.
Exactly. And just the whole like thing about like trying to get Scanlan to make that trade even after he had already like said that he didn't want to do it, and just the like,
I mean, the disguise self, the message earring, and the telekinesis, like all three of those in this first half of the episode, like it's just the first half of the episode. And there's three instances where he's been just like, I'm going to act and people are going to deal with it.
exactly, and like act in a way that is just like, oh, what I'm doing is the right thing and I should be the center of attention, rather than like letting other people play to their strengths. Like the
Yeah.
whole like earring thing especially bugged me, because that's just like, that's an important piece for the twins and their like ability to communicate with each other, and like a way for them to keep that link that they have despite like traveling in a party and stuff like that.
And
And
there's physical consent going on with that
yeah.
too, because it's literally like an earring that he just walks over and takes out of her ear without
Yeah.
even like asking first. And
Mm-hmm.
that just rubs me the wrong way. But I think there are parallels here that we're seeing between Keyleth and Tiberius. And
Mm-hmm.
they have very different flavors to this, because they both have this ideal in their mind of expectations of what it is for a leader in this group.
Mm-hmm.
And Tiberius is a lot more blustery and arrogant when it comes to it, and
Mm-hmm.
Keyleth is a lot more ignorant and naive, I guess.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of similarities between them.
Mm-hmm. And I think, again, as we have done many times, it's interesting to compare like what works with Keyleth versus what doesn't work with Tiberius. Because even though Keyleth has her moments where she gets kind of like worked up about things and set in her ways, she's still like, once she's had a time to calm down, she's still like listens to everyone, and that's more of like a conscious character choice on Marisha's behalf. Whereas with Tiberius, it's very much like a sort of hero complex of like needing to be the center of attention, and it seems very much like Orion's actions through Tiberius and Orion's desire to be the main character of this party.
Yeah. I mean, like, there are times where Keyleth's, for lack of a better word, ignorance and naivete that we've talked about so far does come off as arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think she uses that as a character choice. Like, it's not, I don't know if I would call Tiberius's arrogance conscious.
Yeah.
But it's definitely well ingrained.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like Keyleth's arrogance, where it does show up occasionally, is more of a misstep than a pre-thought out plan of action.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can explain that difference better, but there is,
I get what you're saying.
Yeah. And like, that's why I think Keyleth does rub people the wrong way sometimes, because she is, I mean, she's awkward and she's charming in her awkwardness, which also, like, you know, I also have misgivings about Tiberius's enormous charisma score as a sorcerer, because, like, I don't understand how that computes.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a character that has really low charisma, Keyleth. I think she has like a 10. And then we're also looking at Tiberius, who has, I think, like a plus 13 to his spell bonus, which has his charisma built into it. So I would guess that his charisma is like, what, plus 8, something like that.
Something like that.
7. And like, they have the same view of leadership too, like this ideal of leadership, of like taking charge and protecting what they think is most valuable in the group. But there's just a lot of Venn diagrams going on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm biased, of course, because we've seen the rest of this campaign and we know how things end up, but there is a lot to Keyleth's character that has rubbed me the wrong way over the years, and I've actually had to spend a lot of time coming to terms with that, because I also see parts of her that I see within myself. And so I've had to be like, yes, I do kind of make these arrogant, I know better decisions in the moment, but I also try to learn from those if possible. Which brings up the question, what personal experiences are we thinking about here?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, to go back to the whole idea of the religion aspect of everything, I think I just think back to, I've talked about it on this podcast before, but like my own religious experiences and like that feeling of being othered for like an important part of my life and like not fitting in because of that.
Yeah. I mean, so many of us have that experience, and I think there's a good portion of the Critical Role fan base who can relate to that. I think, like, I always make the joke that I tend to attract people who used to be in religious cults. And I feel like Critical Role's the same way. Like, I feel like they attract the type of people that used to be in religious cults. Because we've all had these othered experiences with organized religion or organized cults, whatever you want to call it, and we recognize that in each other.
Yeah.
Are there any specific experiences that you're thinking about, or is it just the swap?
I think the main one that I've been thinking of is just like the experience of being queer and how that like inherently others me in most Christian circles.
Mm-hmm.
And how that is seen as like wrong and deviant in the same way that arcane magic is. And
Interesting.
it's interesting parallels there.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's basically you as a queer person, us as queer people walking into the Vatican and being like, hey,
Yeah,
I'm gay.
exactly. And like having the people in the Vatican like ask us to like tone it down and keep it
Yeah.
under wraps.
I mean, it's fascinating too, because Tiberius, in casting disguise self to make himself more acceptable to them, actually others himself even more because he uses magic to do it.
Exactly. Yeah, but even that is interesting too, like the fact that they show more distrust towards him for not being a metallic dragon.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my personal experiences actually have to do a lot with mansplaining. Like, I didn't really think about this until we were talking about it, but that physical consent thing with Tiberius taking the earring off of Vex, I think is just so real for me that it hurts. Like, just people touching you without your permission, people like instructing you to do things without your permission, you know, people even affecting your success, like the whole arrow and telekinesis thing that happens, people taking credit for this outrageous success that you've had as an individual and having that be like, I was even watching the chat as it rolled by on the video and it was like teamwork, you know, like some people were like writing like it takes two, you know, stuff like that. And I was like, oh my God, that's so minimizing.
Yeah.
Rolled a 35. Like, that's beyond impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So mansplaining, having people take credit for my achievements. Like, I know I've told this story on this podcast before, but of the art history project that I did in high school where I did the entire project by myself and everyone just kind of got the A and moved on with their life and it was a group project. Like that's a perfect example of this kind of thing where even if someone else does all the work and deserves all the credits, like there are still going to be people who superimpose themselves.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's a frustrating experience.
Yeah. And I think it just is doubly so too, the fact that we are queer women. Like it's just piling on top of each other at this point. Like when we're talking about other identities, like I've always been an other identity. Like it's not just because I'm a queer, not just because I'm a woman, not just because I'm, you know, counterculture to a lot of things. It's just I've always been an other in individuality and personality and situation wise. And it's interesting because you talk about your religious experiences and I actually kind of had the opposite where I had a mother who was very staunchly anti-Christian. And so I was almost on the other end of the spectrum where it's like I was very much a Keyleth where I just hated all organized religion and judged people for that. But that's not the better response.
No, because not all organized religion is like that.
Yeah.
There's other religions out there, and there are even, I will acknowledge, there are like factions of Christianity that aren't like that and that are progressive. And so we can't really paint everybody with the same brush, even if we have that hurt and that those biases. Like, absolutely, we should like call out bigotry and all that sort of stuff when we see it. But like, we can't just assume that just because somebody is religious means that they like that it's a bad thing.
Totally. And I think what we're seeing here is that there is a spectrum between as an other, there is a spectrum between like becoming 120% other and trying to assimilate and pretend that we're not other.
Yeah.
And we see Vox Machina fall at different stages along this spectrum.
Absolutely.
That they're making. So what are we being called to do?
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of things, but it's hard to find a specific call to action in this specific conversation.
I mean, I think it's my relationship with otherness that I need to look at as a outcome of this episode, is like, you know, I do recognize that I've changed. I've moved on the spectrum from high school Claire that was just angry at everyone and everything to present Claire, who has a lot more tolerance for things. But I also admit that I've strayed towards the other end of the spectrum over the years of trying to assimilate my otherness. And it's kind of like a pendulum swing. Like in high school, I was very much on the I'm going to be other no matter what phase, to I'm just going to squash all my otherness and try to pretend that I'm just a normal average American, which I could never do. So I am kind of like swinging between the middle right now, but I think it's good to be aware of that over time and just be more conscious of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's where our biases come from.
Absolutely. It's always, I mean, that's something that was drilled into my head all through university, like especially being in a field that's about like working with other people, is to constantly be aware of your biases, because it's not possible to eliminate biases completely, but it is possible to recognize what your biases are and how it will like reflect upon your opinions and how you interact with other people. And if you're not aware of your biases, you could very easily harm people through your biases. And so that's something that I've had constantly drilled into my head throughout the years of my degree, and I think has become like part of an understanding that is well integrated into my life at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about like what it would look like if Vox Machina took more time to be self-reflective.
Yeah, like self-reflective isn't really a part of any of Vox Machina's habits.
Yeah, like what would it look like if Keyleth had a therapist?
What would it look like? I mean, I don't think we would need D&D adventuring parties if people had access to therapy.
Well, we're kind of seeing it in campaign 3 right now.
That's
with
true.
FCG, and I like, you know, that led to the thought of like, what if FCG was deposited into Vox Machina? And I was like, they would absolutely hate him.
They would hate him so much. He would call out all of their problems. And then they would completely lose trust in him for like his murderbot tendencies.
Right.
It would not go well.
Yeah, it'd be a totally different campaign if you just inserted a little more self-reflection and a little more therapy.
Yeah, I do think it would be interesting, though. I feel like Percy and FCG would get along a surprising amount, because Percy would be intrigued by how FCG works.
Oh yeah, totally.
And FCG would just have a field day with all of that trauma. And they would both get each other of the like unintentional intensity of violence and that sort of stuff.
Unintentional intensity of violence. That, I mean, if that's a tagline of Percy, I don't know. Well, anything we want to add before we wrap up?
I can't think of anything. I think we've covered a lot of good stuff, as always.
I mean, it just goes to show us that like it's a bottomless well of information that we get from this series. And like, that's what I love about the sacred reading practices, because we're constantly being like, all right, how does this compare to my actual experiences? And how does it impact how I view those experiences? And
yeah,
it's why we return to Critical Role time and time and time and time again. Like, I'm in the middle of campaign 2 rewatching it as well, and like I've just been gleefully laughing by myself like a week now, because we're just on holiday break, and it's been wonderful. And no matter how many times I watch it, there's always something new that I notice as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this is powerful stuff that we're talking about per usual. In the audience, we definitely encourage you to share your own insights and feelings and stories and experiences with us as well. We'd love to know how Critical Role has impacted you in your own lives. And special thanks to Petall for joining me on this episode once again. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been great to be on and have these conversations.
I mean, I finally marked down when the Halloween episodes were. So
nice.
We're about halfway there. About halfway through the first one, because we're talking about doing something special for the Halloween episode.
Yes.
So we are making our way. So next time we will be discussing campaign 1, episode 16, part 2, and joining me again will be Petall. So I'm super excited for that. And I'm always looking for more co-hosts and guests. So if you're interested in coming on the series, just hit me up. I'll send you the link. And in the meantime, please comment, like, subscribe to below YouTube and Tumblr, Sacred Reading CR. And until next time, may all beings be peaceful, may all beings be free, and always, always, always remember to love each other. Take care, guys.